Also, the Russian government's intent is explicitly genocidal. Yes, it is. Keep in mind, blood and soil was literally in Putin's like initial premise for the invasion of Ukraine, justification-wise, and Russian state media constantly is having people on who are doing pure genocide shit, saying that Ukraine isn't a real country and Ukrainians aren't real people, saying that it is the place of Ukraine to be under the dominion of Russians, because like historically that's been a thing that they've done to Ukrainian people. The idea that a full Russian conquest of Ukraine would be a peaceful resolution is the most like insane Nazi brain I've ever heard in my life. Yeah, dude, these guys were war criming and invading and Lebensrauming their way all the way across the entirety of Ukraine. But what they really want at the end of all of it is peace. That's why they're doing it. That's why they're invading Ukraine. For peace. That's what we can look forward to. Apparently on the Leftovers podcast, they had the man, the myth, the legend, Richard Wolff on, and people said that his takes were really bad. That's what I've heard. You know, many people have said this.
Capitalists in America are grateful, if they're honest, for the cheap Chinese goods that have made it possible for profits to go up without rising wages, because you could go to your neighborhood TJ Maxx store and buy inexpensive Chinese clothing, or to the other stores. You know, there is no Amazon, there is no Walmart without Chinese goods. If you plot the growth of Walmart and the growth of China, you discover something. It's the same business.
Is this really a hot take that like internal American economic production and distribution relies on cheap Chinese labor and manufacturing? I guess I'm just surprised that he's talking about this, because this, I don't know if this is contentious anywhere, you know? Like, it's not even, I don't even know if it's something the right would even disagree with. Like, obviously, one of the big things that Trump talked about was, like, jobs leaving to China. So, like, yeah, of course it would be. Like, I think everyone agrees here.
The China...
It's because of the way he talks. It doesn't sound like he's laying down some universally agreed upon stuff to pave the way for a more radical take. It sounds like he's speaking from the mount, you know, like he's screaming sermons. It's because of the way he talks.
Produce us on everything, but they could never have gotten into the American market unless Walmart, Target, and all the others acted eagerly to be the distributor of those Chinese goods and to make a fortune for themselves along the way. Those are the realities. The rest
Trying to cut in
is make-believe. Nobody wants this war in Ukraine. Above all, the people of Ukraine, who are suffering beyond all words.
There wasn't even like a lead into that. He just says it. Okay.
Destruction of their society. Who's benefiting out of this? I mean,
American weapons manufacturers.
Excuse me?
American weapons manufacturers are.
American weapon manufacturers make plenty of money on their off days anyway. I don't, like, nobody wants this war in Ukraine. Well, Putin does. That's why he did it and is still doing it. I always dislike the implication here, because the implication is like that the American military-industrial complex is responsible for prolonging the Ukraine war. And I've always felt like that's that's the implicit statement that they're too cowardly to openly defend. Because there are only two directions you can take that. One would be like, I want America to give Ukraine more weapons. They're prolonging the war by not giving them more weapons. In which, like, that's clearly not Hasan's position, because Hasan doesn't want them to give Ukraine more weapons. Likewise, that's up to the government, not up to our weapons corporations. And additionally, like, the other direction you can take that is that America's prolonging the war by standing in the way of peace talks between Russia and Ukraine. But how are we? The only people who can negotiate a peace talk are Zelensky and Putin. That's it. Those are the only two people capable of doing that. And Zelensky has made it very clear he doesn't want to cede the easternmost fifth of his country to Russia. So until Russia retreats, that's not happening. So I'm probably getting ahead of the topic here.
Yep.
It seems like those with the least to lose and the most to gain out of this are the ones that are pushing for it and pushing for the continuation of it. whether it be Boris Johnson back when he was the prime minister going into Ukraine during the first round of peace negotiations or possible ceasefire and peace negotiation talks that were happening, organized by Turkey, or whether it be Ned Price and numerous other American State Department officials continuously talking about how...
See, this is conspiracy nonsense. Yeah, obviously, Ukraine is allied with the West. Obviously, our political leaders would talk about and have some investment in Ukraine. But that's not prolonging the suffering. If it wasn't for our investment, Russia would have just taken Ukraine, or at the very least gotten to Kiev and held Kiev. Like, it's the cowardice in the implication that bothers me. If you really think the least bloody option here would have just been to cede the entire country to Russia and let Russia conquer all of it, then just say that. I wish they would just up front be like, okay, I think the thing that we should have let happen was we not support our ally, we not give them anything, and we just let Russia take all of it. And that would be the best. And if at least once you've made that position, we can argue it, like we can back and forth on that. But not this like conspiracy bullshit of like, oh yeah, leaders in the West are prolonging the war somehow through some nebulous means.
They are not interested in peace at all. Obviously, there's an argument here about what Ukrainians want, and some will say that, well, the overwhelming majority of Ukrainians want to keep fighting this fight, but ultimately, we are not giving Ukrainians everything they want. It's not like we're, implementing Article 5. We're not.
Well, yeah, we do that. Yeah. They're not in NATO. They're not in NATO. We can't. Boris Johnson explicitly told Zelensky not to agree to a peace deal. Not really a conspiracy. No, that is still a conspiracy. He's allowed to have input. So a leader goes over and tells Zelensky, hey man, don't just like cede a third of your territory to Russia. You can fight. Yeah, that's not them conspiring to prolong the war. That's them being supportive of their ally. Like, see, so many terms have been bastardized in the Ukraine conflict. For example, funding a country you're allied with is now referred to as a proxy war. Like, I always thought that a proxy war was like a grand battle between two countries being fought through direct support to like a conflict in a second country. But in this case, Russia is directly invading Ukraine, did so without any prompting from the United States, and our support to Ukraine isn't any categorically different from the kind of support we've provided our allies in times of war before. So we're not there on the ground. We're not implicated if Ukraine wins or loses. It's just supporting an ally.
We're not even giving Ukrainians F-16s. We're not training them on that. We might down the line, I think, but so far, these are demands that they've made.
So we should?
We haven't conceded to. So, I think that pushing for peace negotiations on that front with China and Russia at the other side of the table, with Ukraine and the United States of America on one side of the table would be...
We're not in the conflict. We're not at war. We're not at war. We're not there. There's nothing to negotiate, okay? It's Putin and Zelensky, and the only question is how much, where will the border be when the conflict stops? Right now, Zelensky thinks that he can take back more Ukrainian territory, and I agree with that assessment. It seems like the past year of conflict has leaned in that direction. So he doesn't want peace. He wants to reconquer his territory. Pretty reasonable, for a country that's just been invaded, I think. And Putin won't just leave. He could just leave. That's a thing he gets to do. Zelensky can't just leave. If he just leaves, he loses Ukraine.
The quickest and most swift way to try to stop this conflict and further bloodshed from continuing.
Well, I mean, let me just expand one dimension of that point. We now have a defense budget, depending a little bit on how you look at it, in the neighborhood of $850 billion to $1 trillion. If you take a look, it's more money than the next 8 or 9 countries in the world combined spend on their military. We have just authorized an additional $100+ billion just for the war in Ukraine. Even if you believe
based. In the negotiations, there are two sides. Russia is demanding to hold the territory they took, including Crimea, and that Ukraine demilitarizes and they stay neutral. Yeah, as I understand it, right now, it's actually Russia that's offering a completely unreasonable set like term for ending the conflict. Where Putin is basically saying like, yeah, we'll stop the fighting as long as we win. Like, yeah, okay, as we'll have a ceasefire as long as you lose. Whereas on the other side, like all Russia has to do in order to get the terms of the cessation of conflict that Zelensky wants is to just move their troops back. Like, why are we pretending that there's some kind of even, like there's some kind of parallel or some kind of even play here? It's two sides who, you know, both have valid concerns and we're going to have to give or take to get a solution. No, one of them's the invader. There's not two equal sides here at all. One side, Zelensky's, has a set of perfectly reasonable demands. Get the fuck out of our country. And Russia's just like, okay, well, we'll stop killing your people if you just surrender to us anyway. Okay? I really wish people like Hasan would just acknowledge this and stop pretending that that this is just like two rowdy children who are like battling back and forth and just need a stern hand to go, okay, now settle down. You know, you've both done some good and some bad.
That one motivation for the Ukraine war is the money being made by the defense industry. We already are doing more than anyone in their right mind could ask to provide them with a profitable business. Over $1 trillion. I don't even think they're that greedy. They're getting a bundle, a big bundle with no opposition.
Guys, I've got a conspiracy for you. Did you guys know that under capitalism, when you do things, the corporations that help you do those things make money? That's a big conspiracy. Don't spread it or the CIA will kill me. Like every time, hey, did you know the weapons industry is making money from us selling weapons? Yes, I knew that. Thank you. Yeah, you can make the exact same argument about us supporting our allies during World War II, like us supporting the British when they were being bombed by the Luftwaffe. We gave many of our allies weapons before we were even directly involved in the war. You know, we were neutral.
No,
well, we weren't neutral, but we were not participants. Yeah.
Nobody opposes the defense budget. I mean, a handful of people, but it's basically trivial. The two parties that run our politics are both eager to outdo one another in supporting the defense budget. They're in very good shape. They don't need another $100 billion war on top of the...
Guys, let's let a fascist dictatorship invade a country and conquer it to own the military defense corporations. Guys, let's let the fascists win and snuff out a country and conquer a bunch of territory, because the alternative would be a bunch of already very wealthy corporations making more money, something that would have happened anyway.
Gift that this one represents. So for me, I don't think it's even them. I wouldn't mind criticizing them if I thought it, but I don't see... They've made a ton of money by all the stuff we've shipped to Ukraine, and all of that will have to be replaced.
Also, the Russian government's intent is explicitly genocidal. Yes, it is. Keep in mind, blood and soil was literally in Putin's like initial premise for the invasion of Ukraine, justification-wise, and Russian state media constantly is having people on who are doing pure genocide shit, saying that Ukraine isn't a real country and Ukrainians aren't real people, saying that it is the place of Ukraine to be under the dominion of Russians, because like historically that's been a thing that they've done to Ukrainian people quite a few times. Like it's not, yeah, it's like full fascist Nazi shit when it comes to the invasion here, which obviously, because there was no reason to invade to begin with. The idea that a full Russian conquest of Ukraine would be a peaceful resolution is the most like insane Nazi brain shit I've ever heard in my life. Like, yeah, dude, these guys were war criming and invading and Lebensrauming their way all the way across the entirety of Ukraine. But what they really want at the end of all of it is peace. That's why they're doing it. That's why they're invading Ukraine. For peace. That's what we can look forward to after they're done.
They will get the money and the profit out of that. The budget is huge, and it got a tremendous boost. Look, I'm an economist, and two things have happened in the last year that strike me as downright funny. We are in a supposed war against the inflation in our country. And to that end, we have a Federal Reserve, our central bank, that has raised interest rates. And that's supposed to slow down the spending by individuals and businesses because they can't, it's too expensive to borrow money at high interest rates, et cetera, et cetera. What's the worst thing you can do to an inflation? Pour money onto it. It's like squeezing kerosene on a campfire. It flares up. It's a stupid thing to do. What have we just done? We have just spent an extra $100 billion on a war in Ukraine. Most of that money goes right back into the American economy because it pays.
What? Okay, I'm not a big econ guy, but I'm pretty sure he's just objectively wrong here. The discretionary budget of the United States government is not us printing money, it's us spending money. Like we drive like if we spend more money than we make in a given tax year, then yeah, we drive up the debt, the deficit increases. But the deficit has been increasing and the debt has been increasing for ages. And the 30-year fixed mortgage rate average in the US has only gone down basically since like the mid 1980s. The only time it's gone up recently is in like starting in 2022 for a variety of reasons, probably tying largely to the COVID pandemic and supply line shortages, but it's already started to go back down. So if the argument is that like debt or deficit increasing is what leads the inflation rate to go up, then why on earth would this be going down over the past 40 years? Oh, guys, am I wrong or is he just objectively incorrect here? The idea that extra defense spending is like what contributes to higher inflation rates. Like I think that at the most that is very reductive. But it might just be outright wrong, isn't it? You're right, his brain is soup. Okay, yeah, like when our government has a budget and they spend money, if they don't make enough money in taxes to pay the entirety of that budget, we have to borrow to spend, which we do almost every year. I think the last time we had a net surplus was under the Clinton years for like 2 years or something. So we're increasing the debt with every single year. And most of our borrowing is like internal American borrowing. Like we borrow from ourselves, we borrow, like it's very, very complicated. But the net result of this is that I don't think you can fairly argue there is a direct relationship between an increase in the debt or deficit and our average inflation rates. Oh, sorry. I was looking at interest rates over year. Hold on. I'm so stupid. I could end up being the biggest cuck in the world. Inflation rates over year chart. It's the same thing. I'm still right. I just used the wrong term, but I'm still correct. Look. Changes in price from the year before. So it's like a year by year comparison. Like with a normalized inflation. You might notice inflation goes up basically every year. Welcome to America. But like the inflation rate, with exception of like the big spike we had recently, has held steady right around like 3%-ish from year to year, in spite of the fact that our deficit keeps going up and up and up. Here, yeah, deficit rates over year. 1.5% per year is optimal, 3% is marginally high. Well, we don't always get what we want. U.S. budget deficit percent of GDP from 1954 to 2018. Total deficit, primary deficit. Yeah. See, it went down right here to the negatives under the Clinton year. Yeah, he's completely full of shit. Okay, I'm sorry. I spent too long on this. Econ isn't my strong suit, but like what he's saying right now, the idea that Wolff is correct here. The idea of increasing interest rate to decrease the amount of money in the system people can use, but excess military spending goes back into the economy. It has nothing to do with deficit. It has to do with how much money people have and what they can spend. Now, how much is that 100 billion actually making into the hands of citizens is arguable, but it's not illogical to make that. No, he's making the argument that like having a higher U.S. budget would mean higher inflation because the higher budget means that we would have to borrow more. The deficit would raise. I just don't think this tracks. What he's saying is dumb, but spending does raise inflation because in times of inflation, you want to constrict the amount of money flowing through the economy. If the supply of money decreases, there's less devaluing of the currency. It's dumb for other reasons. Yeah, but then why doesn't that track with all the other times? Like our deficit increases, our debt increases, but it doesn't seem to track onto what our inflation looks like. Unless he's arguing there's something specific about spending in the defense industry that would lead to an inflationary increase that isn't. Okay, we're moving on. We're moving on because it's not the only factor. I'm not inclined to be charitable to Professor Wolff here.
For the military one way or another. And Mr. Zelensky is not stupid. He understands you better spend that money back in the United States and not in some other country, because that will be the fastest way to cut that game over, number one. The second thing we did when our banks started to collapse.
What? Zelensky has to spend the money from the weapons we've given him in America, or we'll stop. I think right now he's fighting a war. I think that's his primary concern. He's calling Ukrainians welfare queens now. He kind of is.
Collapse a couple of weeks ago was to say that the Federal Reserve is going to come in and give any bank in trouble losing deposits, they can go to the Federal Reserve and borrow brand new money to replace the deposits. Well, let me explain to you. If the deposits go from a troubled bank to an untroubled bank, that's still money circulating in our economy. If the Federal Reserve backstops banks by pumping more money in, then you've got a bank crisis leading to more money and a war leading to more money. You're not slowing down the inflation that way. You're making it worse. What's my point? It's obvious. No one discusses it in this country. No one is saying, wait a minute, we got to think about the inflationary. If we propose to help the food stamp recipients for another 6 months, the issue of inflation would be raised.
Yeah, that's a moral hazard. It's only a moral hazard as it pertains to the working poor when you're helping the working poor. It's never a moral hazard when you're helping bankers get golden parachutes in the aftermath of the 2008 financial collapse. So what you're basically...
Okay, I agree with that. I don't agree that they're equivalent, but I do agree that obviously our government is way more willing to open up the purse strings when it comes to stuff regarding national security and defense than they are for other stuff. I agree with that.
Basically, just to make it a little bit easier to understand for our audience here, am I correct in stating that we have two methods of dealing with the inflation? We have monetary policy and fiscal policy. Right. Fiscal policy conducted by the legislative branch, which is usually just completely powerless, with the exception of the bipartisanship that they always find when it comes down to more money for the military. And then the monetary policy is also one that you can use, and it's pretty much the only one that you can use, unfortunately, because there is no such deflationary fiscal policy that the Republicans or the Democrats will ever allow. So they're utilizing that, the control over the inflation by controlling the interest rates with the express purpose of depressing wages, kicking people out of jobs, with the hopes that like inevitably people will be, this tight labor market will turn back around and you will have a labor force that's willing and able to take less pay for the same work.
Yeah, and again,
okay, it looks like they're talking about other stuff now. 57 is the most egregious part. It gets worse? Okay, 57.
That has a quick dismissal. If they even admit what I just explained to you, which is in every history book and can be verified in 10 minutes of Googling anything.
What?
There's no excuse for what's going on.
What?
Just like breezily dismissing the Ukraine war by saying the Russians and the Chinese don't offer to sit down and have a ceasefire. Both of those countries have done it. Maybe they're lying. Maybe they...
So first of all, we have literal historical evidence of Russia lying and failing to abide by ceasefires and the conditions of both Minsk agreements multiple times. The idea that anyone should presume Russia engages in good faith when they propose ceasefires is ludicrous. That's one. For two, the conditions under which Russia and China have proposed an end to the conflict are ones which essentially assure their victory anyway. It's like, oh God, man, hold on, I'm sorry. Moscow requires Ukraine's neutrality, refusal to join NATO and EU. So that right there shows how bullshit it is that this has anything to do with Russia feeling threatened by being next to an EU country, as though they're not already with the Baltics. But also the EU, because they're terrified that Ukraine chooses to join an economic bloc that isn't theirs. They want Ukraine to join their faltering, natural gas and oil dependent, bullshit, fucking weak, crippled little economic Russian bloc, rather than joining the thriving, prosperous EU. So like right off the bat, like, yeah, so we need you. Not only will we dictate to you as part of these peace talks, not only will we dictate to you whether you get to join a military alliance to defend yourself against us, something which we've made very clear is necessary, but also we get to dictate to you what economic blocks you get to join. So any presumption of national sovereignty is completely out the window in Russia's propositions for peace talks here. Completely insane. The idea that Russia is approaching these in good faith when they are the invaders is absolutely ridiculous. It's disgusting to even suggest that. People will point to Russia being willing to sit down and talk and Ukraine not. And the reason for that is because Ukraine has made its conditions clear. Get the fuck out. Whereas Russia's like, hey, we just want to talk. We have a great peace solution for you, okay? All you have to do is give us everything east of Kyiv, and we'll get along. Hey, man, why aren't you willing to talk with us? Hey. Yeah, like it's so obviously dishonest, but people like this keep pushing it and keep defending it. It seems so much will depend on how quickly Kyiv and the West realize the recipe for a peaceful future for Ukraine lies in a return to the origins of its statehood recorded in the 1990 Declaration on State Sovereignty. You were going to include Crimea in the initial, which provides for a neutral, non-block status of Ukraine with respect for the rights of the Russian population of the country and its national minorities. Galuzin also said Russia will, quote, not tolerate the existence of an openly anti-Russian state on its borders. So they're literally saying, like, okay, we'll control your military alliances, we'll control your economic bloc, and, oh, by the way, we get to decide whether or not you're anti-us, which, by the way, historically, Russia has defined Ukraine as being anti-Russian by not being a puppet state. Literally, they called Ukraine an anti-Russian state after Euromaidan, and Yanukovych fled after trying to turn the country into a dictatorship. So, like, their definition of anti-Russian state is one which is not just a puppet of theirs. Ridiculous. It frustrates me to no end that lefties treat Ukraine's demand as a non-starter, as though Ukraine has to surrender land at some point. Yeah, it's so pathetic, man. A gigantic thread, 2,000 comments, holy shit, on the H3H3 production subreddit, the initial post of which got deleted, by the way, of people protesting against Hasan's awful takes on Ukraine. I don't think lefties like Hasan, though I'd consider this a far-right position on the Ukraine conflict, understand how isolating and how weird and how strange it is for lefties to go on and on and on about, like, anti-fascism, equitable treatment for minorities, and then to just bald-facedly, line for line, repeat Russian propagandists in their defense of a fascist state taking over a liberal democracy with explicit blood and soil apologia in their justification for doing so. It's a little jarring to have, we get it, America bad, man, military-industrial complex bad, but it's not just that, because if it was just a principled opposition to the military-industrial complex, you wouldn't be pretending that Russia is offering peace deals in good faith. It's not just America bad. If you want to think America bad, then Godspeed, go for it. It's a free country, unlike Russia, where you wouldn't be able to say Russia bad. You get arrested for that. That doesn't excuse you from being wrong. You're like repeating Russian disinfo, pretending that shit, man. It's so bad. Why? Like, they can't even muster I hope Ukraine wins. Wouldn't that be a sensible thing for an America bad leftist to say? Hey, I really don't like the military support we're offering, and I don't like the escalation that our, like, arms are sort of, like, leading to, but, like, Russia's fascist, Ukraine isn't, I hope Ukraine kicks their asses, I'm sorry we can't do more, but Godspeed. I still disagree with that position. I think we should support our allies, but, like, would that not be a reasonable take? But they can't take that take because that's not pro-Russia enough, Would it be enough if he said that? Because he has. He's said that. But then you go on and do shit like this. You can't do that and then engage in conspiracism about how it's the military-industrial complex that's prolonging the war, the West prolonging the war, how, like, Ukraine is our puppet, which is a far-right Russian talking point, pretending that, like, Russian peace deals are on the table or there's some kind of, like, conciliatory, urge we have to prompt in both sides to secure peace, without mentioning what that peace would look like, by the way, which would be a fascist country gaining territory. Every element of the way this is being framed is pro-Russian. You can say, oh, Russia's in the wrong. Oh, I don't support their invasion, all you want. But as long as when you're actually talking, about the way you want to move forward, you're framing it in that way, it's inexcusable.
Cop out once you started the process. But we're not in a very good position to call them bluffers if we haven't called the bluff. And if we're willing to sit down without conditions, why don't we say so? And I don't think you can use the argument.
Why would we sit down without conditions when Russia has already laid out the conditions for peace talks and they're unacceptable? First of all, we have conditions and they have conditions. What do you mean sit down without conditions? What would the point of that be? They would immediately just say their conditions. Russia's conditions currently is unacceptable.
About what the Ukrainians want, because here I'm not interested in criticizing Mr. Zelensky, but you should know, if you don't, that he has shut down opposition newspapers, opposition media, opposition politicians. He's fighting a war. Maybe you have to do that in war.
A huge portion of the Zelensky shutting down opposition that people on the left who mysteriously repeat Russian talking points have been inclined on has been him shutting down media outlets and political parties that are explicitly pro-Russia. I remember there being a bunch of controversial news cycles there where we're like the parties that were being shut down were literally collaborators in the invasion, like explicitly like direct ties to Russia, publicly pro-Russia. Dog, look, I'm all for free speech or whatever, but if you're being invaded, literally, like not a war's happening abroad, but invaded, and there are politically connected people and businesses in your country that are openly collaborating with the people who are shelling and killing your citizens, I think it's okay to arrest them or disband their groups. Personally, I think that's fine. If we didn't want these free speech concessions to have to be made, perhaps we should have not invaded Ukraine. It is, after all, war is a situation that demands of people perhaps more than they might want to give when it comes to concessions. Oh, Kanye, for sure. I 100% believe that the Western left's obsession with gargling Russian state media cock on this issue and many others has been a product of like a multi-decade deliberate effort from the Kremlin to associate leftism with brain-dead, dumb, anti-American. Anything that is anti-American is good, no matter what. It doesn't matter if they're worse in every way. Like, ideology. I really do believe that, yeah. I still have to listen to people talk about how China is socialist. Kill me.
But there is no way to know what the mass of the Ukrainian people feel unless you want to take the fact that somewhere between 6 and 7 million of them have left the country, and it's not that big a country.
What? We have polls on what the Ukrainian people want, and they're leaving the country because it's being invaded. Did he just imply that they were leaving the country out of disgust for Zelensky's leadership? I think he did. He was like, we can't know what the Ukrainian people want, but so many of them are leaving. Why are they leaving, Wolff? Like, this is what I mean. This is not interpretable as just principled opposition to our military-industrial complex. This right here is just retarded pro-Russia shit. No thinking, no thoughts, no analysis. It's clown shit. Isn't he talking about Russia? No, he was talking about Ukraine. Listen.
Ukrainian media, opposition politicians. He's fighting a war. Maybe you have to do that in war. But there is no way to know what the mass of the Ukrainian people feel.
Yes, there is. We have polling data. Hold on. In December 2022, the Kyiv Institute of Sociology found 84% of Ukrainians trust Zelensky, a threefold jump from the survey it fielded in December 2021. Only Ukraine's armed forces have a larger support base, with 96% of Ukrainians trusting them. These are levels of support that America hasn't seen for anything since like 9/11 for Bush. Poll from August 11th, 2022, 91% of Ukrainians approve of Zelensky's job performance. May 9th, 94% of Ukraine, like literally everything we have. It's like people like fully support him as the dark green t-shirt wearing, long sleeve t-shirt, a long sleeve shirt wearing defender of Ukraine. It's like so, like everything we have, every time, every poll, every group of people in Ukraine. There's no ambiguity to it. There's no doubt. Zero doubt. And then big brain Wolff over here is going to be like, well, nobody knows if they support Zelensky, but like a lot of people are leaving Ukraine probably because they don't like Zelensky.
Unless you want to take the fact that somewhere between 6 and 7 million of them have left the country, and
Why, must be because they're just so dissatisfied. That's why all the people in Ukraine support Zelensky. Because all the people who don't support him are just so just hate him so much they left.
it's not that big a country, and that would not be
Not that big of a country. It's the what? It's the largest country in Europe that isn't Russia, and Russia's the biggest country on Earth. It's 40 million people. What do you mean? I mean, it's not big compared to us, but
a sign that you would want to make a big argument about, that this shows that they're in favor of fighting to the last Ukrainian, since they've made a choice not to be among those last Ukrainians that we're fighting for.
that's so disgusting, dude. He's referring to refugees who are fleeing war in Ukraine as an argument against the country defending itself. A lot of those people who fled are women and children. Like initially, service-age men weren't even allowed to leave the country. Like millions and like hugely so. A lot of those people who have left are women and children fleeing a war zone. And he's like, well, you know, these women and children who have fled a war. I mean, that's a pretty good argument. Maybe people are sick and tired of the war. I agree, they are, but not because of what Zelensky's doing. Can we just say Richard Wolff is fully discredited? This is, again, I've said this before. It's like with Zizek and the puberty blockers thing. Disagreeing with me is one thing. Being retarded while disagreeing with me is another thing entirely. And this is not just disagreeing with me. This is like no thought. Like this is insane clown bullshit. Just zero thought, zero IQ, just gargling Kremlin cock, no thought whatsoever, which I have no respect for at all and is not forgivable.
So it does strike me as there's an awful lot of accumulated evidence that we're not dealing honestly and straightly with these major problems of our society.
He's literally making the conspiracy argument. He's literally saying, hey, ignore the 58,000 polls that show everyone in Ukraine supports Zelensky. Look at all these war orphans. This is evidence somehow. People fleeing the Russian invasion is somehow evidence that Zelensky needs to surrender to Russia. That's what he's saying. Look at all these people who have fled Russia. Zelensky needs to sit down and concede to Russia and concede territory in order to bring the conflict to an end.
And that's usually the sign of a society that is scared shitless, if you pardon my Spanish, and therefore is functioning with a level of anxiety that is scary to watch.
Yeah, they got invaded by, a country invaded them. There's a war.
Getting back to fiscal policy and monetary policy.
God, just let them roll with it.
You talked about some things that have demonstrably worked, like the Nixon price freeze. For contemporary America,
Man, just right with it. It feels like somebody going on Fox News to talk about, like, I don't know, the economy, and then having like a 5-minute rant on white nationalism that just goes completely unquestioned by the hosts, and then they move on from it and don't address it again. It's really, really bad. I wonder if the mods deleted this post or if they deleted it themselves. They also failed to mention Ukraine surrendering their nukes peacefully in return for being left alone, only to have Crimea stolen a few years later. It's like everyone here, it's all like Ethan Klein fans who hate what Hasan is doing and saying about this. And I don't blame it, because again, it's like psychotic. My husband is Ukrainian and I am strongly behind you. What peace talks? Ukraine wants to be left alone and be a sovereign nation. There's not ambiguity. If France invaded Spain, if Canada invaded the US, there is no question that the invaded country should have its borders and sovereignty restored. Won negotiations to stop the unprovoked bombing and killing of people. I'm shocked with Hasan's take in Ukraine. Well, it's the same take he's always had. So maybe this is just the first time it's come up on Leftovers. This person's defending Hasan, but doing so with points that I've talked about. This is a very active subreddit. The Hasan fans in the sub were saying the sub was rated by your fans. There are some weird people in Hasan's fan group. It's like, because he has such a broad tent, so it's like the anti-me people are very conspiratorial. Maybe Ukraine shouldn't have worn such a short skirt. Yeah, true. You should debate the two on their podcast. Well, Ethan, first of all, Ethan wouldn't disagree with anything I have to say. For two, Hasan would never debate me on this. 0% chance that he ever would. There's no chance in the world that he would ever do that. Hasan just wants the war to end. Yeah, the problem is, like wars can end on good or bad terms. For instance, I would think that the history with Russia has made it pretty clear that a war ending with them doesn't actually mean that much. Like, Ukraine was given sovereignty, and then, when they failed to make Ukraine a puppet state through Yanukovych and making him a dictator, they just invaded the Donbass, and they took Crimea. Like, and then they violated the ceasefire with the Minsk Accords multiple times, and they lied constantly about their level of involvement in supporting and then, like, directly sending troops into the Donbass. And then they invaded all of Ukraine. Like, the idea that anyone should ever trust Russia when it comes to just, oh yeah, well, we'll make any concession to end the conflict, is just appeasement. It's just appeasement. It's no different. It's just appeasement. The only way this conflict can really properly end is by Russia being beaten back and crippled. And people don't like to hear that, you know? But that's because they're not realists. They don't understand how the world actually works. There is no reason to believe that a country that would invade with no provocation whatsoever like Russia would be cowed into not doing so again in the future out of what? Good vibes? Peace? All you're showing them by conceding territory from Ukraine's perspective is that they can get what they want by doing this. Oh, Russia just has to tank their economy and lose 150,000 soldiers and they get more territory. Oh, great. Maybe they can advance further towards Kiev next time, you know? They don't care. The Kremlin doesn't care about tanking its economy and killing its people. They're already dirt poor. They already kill their own people all the time. They don't give a shit. It's not a democracy. You get nothing from this. The only way to really stop conflict is to make it clear to the oligarchy, the real people in power in Russia, that, you know, this is like a bear they can't afford to mess with. And you are doing the opposite of that by trying to push Zelensky into an early secession, into an early peace talk with a bunch of, like, requirements on Russia's part that are insane. Like, hey, we get to choose your military alliance. We get to choose your economic bloc. We get to decide whether or not we invade you in the future based on the nebulous claim of you being anti-Russian. And, like, what do we get from this, you know? I'm sorry, the millions of war refugees get to come home to a country that's 20% smaller, you know? It's just insane. Ending a war on its own means nothing. What do you mean by crippling them? I mean this. They lose in Ukraine. They get pushed back. They lose their money. They lose their people, you know, as long as it takes, as bloody as it is, because a permanent solution, one in which Russia really, truly will not invade again, is only one that can come about if Putin is either disempowered or completely disinclined to any kind of invasion in the future. But Putin is like an insanely militant, ego-driven, nuclear-armed dictator. So I don't want to trust him after giving him, like, the, you know, oh yeah, all you have to do is bully countries around that you get whatever you want lesson. There are no easy answers here. What happens if Ukraine is like, okay, fine, we'll do the peace talks, you get to keep your territory, and also we don't join NATO, and also we have to do your economic bloc, and blah, 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 blah. And then Russia just invades again. They'll just do the same thing. They literally said, we will not tolerate an anti-Russian country on our border. Oh, by the way, guys, I wonder whether or not they would find any anti-Russian sentiment in Ukraine after invading Ukraine and conquering a portion of its territory before getting a forced cessation of arms. I wonder if they'd be able to find any, I don't know, politicians or media that are anti-Russia in Ukraine after that. And then they just invade again. What's going to stop them from invading? A peace treaty? They'll just break it. Why wouldn't they? They do that shit all the time. They break treaties all the time. The only power treaties have are, they're weighted against your trustworthiness as a country. And Russia has none. They've broken everything. Ukraine traded their nukes to Russia for the promise of national sovereignty. And then they got invaded. You're right, but are we just going to beat them back perpetually? It's Ukraine's decision. If Ukraine wants to keep fighting, then yeah, that's the right of Ukraine. If the people support Zelensky, the troops of Ukraine support Zelensky, and they're willing to keep fighting, then yeah, that is how that works. They are the ones who get to decide. But yes, they keep fighting and fighting and fighting, and eventually, you know, Russia's back will break. And if Ukraine needs Western support to do that, because Ukraine is a small new country and Russia is a gigantic old one, well, technically the Russian Federation's pretty young, but you know what I mean. Then I say we should support them. because I have this old-fashioned lefty value of I think the fascists should lose. Zelensky is still defending Russia too in the same way. I know. Putin said, yeah, Tequila Sunset. Good point, by the way. When the war began, Putin went on state Russian TV and he explicitly said that he felt he should reestablish the borders of the old Russian Empire. He said that. I don't know if you guys remember, but he said that. He just flat out said, yeah, we want to restore the borders of the old Russian Empire. Now, I don't know how much you guys know about the old Russian Empire and how far out that one went. But you're gonna have to creatively transpose some borders in your mind here. But if you can see Europe over here, you've got Spain and France, and you see where the Russian Empire borders came to, I think you can understand. See, where's Finland? There's a big chunk of land right around here. Used to be part of the empire. Putin explicitly said, can I find that? President Vladimir Putin has compared himself to Peter the Great, saying that he shares the 18th century Tsar's goal of returning Russian lands to a greater empire. It's from June 10th, 2022. No, there was more explicit. There was like a direct quote. Equally worrying is that Putin's February 21st speech referred quite explicitly to restoring not the Soviet Union, but the Russian Empire as it existed prior to 1917. That not only calls into question all the former Soviet states, but also a large part of Poland, including Warsaw, which was part of the Russian Empire. Yeah, okay, yeah. I knew I remember him explicitly saying this. But dude, trust me, just surrendering to him and letting him completely control Ukraine is the only way forward. All right, get me out of here. Get me out of here.